So welcome to another segment of my biology videos as we continue under our genetics, but this time we are focusing on variation. What exactly is variation? Well, you can simply put or define variation as simply the differences in characteristic among organisms of the same species. So we are able to see a lot of differences if you look at organisms of the same species. For example, there are people that have a bald head, others do not have. There are people that are able to roll their tongue, others cannot. Others are fat, others are actually slim. Others are light, others are dark. So those differences in characteristic among organisms of the same species, that is what we call as being variation. So we can say variation, refers to the differences. So refers to the differences in characteristics, among organisms. So among organisms of the same species. So that is what we simply call as being variation. Now we can talk about types of variation. So when we talk about types of variation, mainly we classify them into two categories. So there are two types of variation that we are going to be talking about. One, what we simply call as being discontinuous. We do have what we call as being discontinuous variation. We also have what we are calling as being continuous variation. So I'm going to briefly talk about in details what each type of variation is. So let me start with the first one, which I'm calling as being discontinuous variation. What type of variation is this one? So that is what we want to know. Well, when we talk about discontinuous variation, it's a type of variation where an individual or characteristic has a clear-cut, different groups with no intermediate forms. So I can simply say is a type of variation where a characteristic has clear-cut. So it actually has clear-cut, distinct groups with no intermediate. That's what we mean. So in discontinuous variation, you're going to find that a characteristic or an individual will show clear-cut, difference with no intermediate. With no intermediates that are going to be there. For example, if you are male, no one can actually mistaken you to being female. You are clear-cut. That's what we can talk about. If you are female, you are female. So now, what are some examples of discontinuous variation? So examples of discontinuous variation may actually include, things like we can talk about maybe your sex, whether you are male or female. You cannot change overnight and say, no, today I want to become a female, tomorrow I want to become male. It's not possible. So sex shows a clear-cut, distinct groups. Two, we can also talk about what we are calling as being, blood group. So if you're in blood group A, you cannot change to being blood group B tomorrow. If you're in blood group AB, you cannot do the same. So blood group shows a clear-cut, distinct group. Another one that you can talk about is what we call as being fingerprint. Your fingerprint is not the same as the other person. It will be different. Not even identical twins have the same fingerprints. It is actually, going to be different. Another one we can talk about is what we call as being eye color. So the colors of your eyes, if your eyes are black, brown, blue, green, you cannot change. It will always show a clear-cut difference that we can talk about. Another one that we can simply talk about is what we simply call as being tongue rollers. So they are those that are able to roll their tongue. Those show what we are calling as being discontinuous, variation. Another one I can talk about, you can also talk about maybe type of, earlobe. Yeah, so the type of earlobe that you have, do you have maybe an earlobe that is actually flying, or do you have an earlobe that is actually fixed? So there are some people that have an earlobe that is fixed, others have got one which is actually flying. So the type of earlobe that someone has, that indicates discontinuous variation. So these are actually some of the examples of what we can call as being discontinuous variation. But the question is, what causes a person to have a clear-cut distinct group with no intermediate forms? What are the causes? In simple terms, we are simply talking about what are the causes of discontinuous variation. So the causes of discontinuous variation, one can include, lack of environmental. So lack of environmental, control, or if you want, you can say influence. So lack of environmental control, influence. E.g., we can talk about maybe the diet that you eat has nothing to do with discontinuous variation. The weather where you are, in this case, it has nothing to do with that. The climate where you are, it has nothing to do with that. So the diet, the weather, your climate cannot change you being male to being female tomorrow, or having black eyes to having brown eyes tomorrow. They can't affect you. So lack of environmental control or influence. Two, we can simply say control by one or few genes. So such characteristics are simply controlled by one or few genes. You can imagine a person that doesn't have a lot of friends, has got only one friends. Obviously, you learn the good traits from the other. You will not easily be influenced. So because such characteristics are controlled by one or few genes, that contributes to what we are calling as being discontinuous variation. Now, I want you to remember that characteristics that show this type of variation. So characteristics that show this type of variation are normally, we can say they are normally plotted on a histogram, something that looks like a histogram, or sometimes you can use what we are calling as being, bar charts, of course, with, spaces that are going to be existing between them. For example, I can maybe have what we are calling as being maybe the number of, the number of people that you are dealing with. And this side, you can simply talk about maybe what we are calling as being maybe, eye color. So now when you plot that, what you're going to find is that you're going to find, such, bar charts that you are going to have. So this may represent a person maybe having, maybe black eyes, a person having maybe blue eyes, a person that is having what we are calling maybe green eyes, a person that is having maybe brown eyes. So this is the type of a graph that you are going to have. So sometimes in the exam, we can just give you such type of a graph and tell you what characteristic is shown. Remember, this is what we are calling as being discontinuous variation. Let's quickly talk about the other type of variation that we talked about, which we are calling as being continuous, variation. What exactly? So let's try to talk about continuous variation. what type of variation is this one? Well, when we talk about continuous variation, it's a type of variation where a characteristic, has many intermediate forms here. So we can say is a type of variation, where a characteristic or individual, characteristic has many, so he has many intermediate forms between extremes. So you show a lot of changes between two extremes. That is what we mean. So when you show a lot of changes between two extremes, then that type of variation is what we simply call as being continuous variation. Examples of what we are calling as being continuous variation in a population among organisms of the same species may include what we are calling as being your body mass. Imagine if you are thin like myself but you are fed so well, you may gain your body mass, which we can also call